joining Cassandra and I. This is actually her second visit to the show. It's been quite some time, but we spoke to her previously for the podcast of the same name. It's her award-winning podcast produced with CBC, also called Alone, a Love Story. And now Dundurn Press is releasing the book. Please welcome back to the show, Michelle Parise. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
Now, last time you were here, and Arthur was with me back then in this new world of broadcasting from home. We've had to do things a little bit differently, but we had such a great talk about the podcast and about your story. And if I remember correctly, you had written the book, but then it kind of became the podcast. And now that initial book inspiration is also available. Is that right?
Yeah, I know. I've done it backwards or whatever, but I just do it my own way. I wrote a book, and then instead of publishing it, I pitched it to CBC Podcasts as a movie for your ears type thing, and they accepted it. And so I basically adapted this unpublished memoir that I wrote into a podcast, which I performed and produced and wrote and did everything. And so then after that I did 28 episodes of that. I turned the book into 28 episodes. And then I got myself a literary agent, and I published, and now the book is published.
But I love that, because I think we sometimes, creative people, even though creativity is kind of about thinking outside the box, sometimes we get stuck in this idea that there's only one way to do something. And so when a story like yours comes along where it's like, well, you kind of, you went in a different direction for a while and then came back to the initial. I think that's always exciting, because it reminds people, you can make your story however you want.
Exactly. I actually think I never set out to write a book or make a podcast. So basically the art was first. I was just creating this thing, and the thing could be whatever it wanted to. You hear a lot of people say, oh, I want to make a podcast. And I'm like, okay, that's you want to get into a car and drive, but where do you want to go? Right. So a podcast or radio or a book, these are all just vehicles for a story. You have to have the story. You have to have the idea. The thing has to exist outside of the medium. And then those are just secondary, I think. So maybe because I always was looking at it from that point of view, I really even wasn't thinking about it in any particular way. I just made a thing, and then I adapted it however I wanted to based on what I felt was available to me.
I actually think that's it does, but I think that is such I'm really wrapped up right now in that idea of the story being first, right? Because I do think a lot of people go, I want to write a book or I want to make a podcast. And they're not necessarily thinking, what is my story? What is the story that I'm passionate to tell, or that I feel like needs to be told? They kind of get caught up in the end game before they get to that first step in the road. And I think that's a really great point.
Yeah, I think the end game is what, people have no trouble visualizing the end, but they don't. The in-between part is missing, and because I had no end game. And of course I can say that I have a job. I have had a long career at CBC as a producer and journalist. So I have the fortune in that sense too. This is not my it wasn't like, it is my life's work in a way, but it wasn't like everything was tied up in it. And so if a publishing deal wasn't like happening, I could just say, oh, well, I'm not going to do that then. I'm going to make a podcast instead. And I still had to pitch it, even though I work at CBC. There's no guarantee that the podcast was going to be made. And I had to pitch every single season, actually, even though the first season was a huge success. I still had to pitch it. But, yeah, I think if you're always looking so far into the future, or like straight to fame and whatever, and not thinking about just the creation first, it might be harder.
So take us back. I was not here last time. Like Allison said, Arthur was chatting with you. Tell us about the podcast and your story.
Well, basically, my life blew up in 2012 in what I refer to in the book and the podcast as the bomb, when overnight, basically, my entire life just turned upside down. I was married one day, and the next day I really was not married. And the bomb was finding out that my husband was having an affair. And so I was just plunged into like a very serious grief response. And I took it very hard. Like, everybody takes it different. And this is just my story and the impact that it had on me. It was very bad. I had no idea. It was a super blindside. And about a year after, I just started writing some stuff down. Well, I'm always writing stuff down. But I started writing it in such a way that I was like, I think this is something. And so I kept going with it. And that turned into the book. Which I mostly wrote while I was drunk and despondent, because I was drunk for a year and a half, basically. Not that, like, most people didn't even know that. I'm like, I was a very functioning, sad person. And then, of course, then that stopped. And so I was able to write about it with that detachment. Of course, it's a serious thing, alcoholism. But, like, for me, it was just a very specific time related to a specific trigger. And that's how I wrote the book, basically.
What I think is
your question, Cassandra.
And then some, yes.
What I think is really great is we are, as you mentioned, like, everyone processes these things in a different way and everyone has a different reaction. But I often think that we are encouraged to downplay our reaction and our emotions, and we have we've been essentially socialized to be ashamed of our feelings, or to, we're so uncomfortable if someone is crying, or if there is that really, if there is a big response, that people feel like if they are completely devastated, if it's a bomb in their life, they feel like they're somehow, their reaction is shameful or embarrassing or something like that. And that always kind of, as someone who is extremely emotional and feels things very deeply, I always appreciate when people can share the fact that, like, listen, this devastated me, this threw me off for a long time, because that is a 100% normal, valid reaction if that is what you feel. Yeah, I do think there is a shame associated with, especially being a woman who's emotional. When you are a vulnerable, outwardly emotional person, you're painted as, like, hysterical or dramatic, or, you know what I mean? Seeking, attention seeking. Like, there are all these really negative things that are associated with being a woman, I think, in particular, who talks about something being hard. And we are socialized as women to downplay everything with each other, too. I mean, you see the way motherhood is portrayed as this, like, wonderful gift from God, and or the heavens, or just this wonderful, like,
blissful, beautiful thing, and it really isn't a lot of the time for a lot of people. That's just one example of the way we've all downplayed all the sexual assault and sexual harassment we've all endured, every single woman, all our lives. So there are these things about talking about things in a realistic way without being painted as hysterical. Like, that was very important to me. That was part of the reason why. So thank you for saying that, because it's part of the reason that I was compelled to put this out there, was to be like, I know that we're told that being vulnerable is bad and we're being dramatic, quote unquote. And I would like to be able to be vulnerable for other people who can't, basically, because I think it's just another way of like us saying we're not the strong, like, how does she do it, woman who can do everything, you know? It's okay to not be able to know how to do everything all the time, or to do things badly sometimes. Absolutely.
And yes, that we are, especially as women, right? As you're saying, again, we're conditioned right from the beginning to compromise and keep secrets and
and compete with each other for greatness. Like, like, I'm just handling this so much better than you are, right? It's like that's part of the way that we are growing. Like, we grow up, like, even as we're in adulthood, we're like, you know, constantly without even trying. I mean, Instagram or whatever is like a perfect example of just showing how beautiful your life is all the time, you know, which I like seeing other people's beautiful lives, even when I'm having a hard time. But I do know that it affects other people quite negatively to see just this happy, look at how everyone's lives are together, but mine is a mess.
Well, and I think...
I wanted to show that, like, hey, your life can be a mess. You're not the only one. Like, everybody's lives are a mess at different times and in different ways. So that was kind of like the whole purpose of the book, really, I think. Sorry, I cut you off about 3,000 times.
No. You are... you're the star of this conversation, and I think saying really important things. And like, I just, you know, that level of competition and comparison, and is something that I still have to work on, but that, you know, I made a decision that I'm not going to compete with women anymore, and I'm not going to, you know, have this idea that if a woman succeeds, it's taking something away from me because there's only room for one woman. You know what I mean?
Which is still weird, right? I mean, why can't we both be successful? Why can't we all be happy for each other? It doesn't have anything to do with, you know, I don't know. And we already, if you're a heterosexual woman anyway, like, you have to deal with that already with a lot of times your male partner, male boyfriends dating men. As a woman, is just like downplaying your own accomplishments because, you know, you don't want them to feel like you're more successful than them or whatever. So, like, we already have to do that. So, like, with each other, let's not do that.
And, you know, you have over 9 million listeners worldwide, from the podcast, the book to the podcast, now to the memoir. What have you learned about yourself throughout this whole experience?
I guess I've learned, you know, that I'm very good at writing. Like, and I'm learning to be okay. Again, this is becoming a real feminist conversation, but like, I think that we're also not supposed to say that we're good, that we think we're good at something. You know what I mean? It's like, that also is a shameful thing to be like conceited. It's, you know, but it's not conceited. It's to say I'm very good at writing, and I learned that. And I learned it because so many people all over the world responded to the writing in such a deep and meaningful way, which means that they have the ability to articulate things in a way that people aren't able to articulate themselves necessarily. And that's a very special thing that I'm I've learned to be okay with saying, like, no, I'm good at this. And it's helpful for people. Like, that's great. Why shouldn't I be happy about that? I mean, I'd be happy about that if it was my friends. So, like, why can't I be happy about that if it's me? And, you know, I'm pretty tough sometimes for such a sensitive, emotional, quote-unquote dramatic, hysterical woman that, you know, have a lot of resiliency and fortitude, I guess. Yeah, that's what I've learned.
And that's, I mean, I loved that answer. And as soon as you said, I've learned that I'm a great writer, I was like, oh, boom. That's a right away, a strong statement that I think is great. Because again, you're right. Like it is that feeling of, you know, I was listening to a podcast this morning about the fundamentalist Church of Latter-day Saints, which is obviously its own whole thing and a dirty nightmare. But they have an expression that they use that the women were always to keep sweet. And it means something very specific and much more aggressive in that little group. But I think in a way, women in general, yeah, we're encouraged to keep sweet. So we don't brag about the stuff we're good about.
No bragging, yeah.
And we don't get upset, and we don't all that. We're kind of encouraged to be that mild-mannered. And I love it when I hear people not doing that. You know what I mean? I love it when women are, and listen, I am very much, you know, I talk a good game, but obviously in our own minds, we're often our own worst enemies.
Of course.
But I am so inspired when I hear, you know, another woman say, I'm good at this. Yeah. And I go, oh, snap. Yes, you are good at that. You know, it's exciting. And so I think there is the fact that people then are responding to your story, that you put yourself out there. Oh, I think it's also why, I mean, I know people in general, but I think women especially we're all in love with Brene Brown, right? Because we're learning that vulnerability is actually bravery and really living your life and experiencing what life has to offer. And so sharing that story I'm so happy that so many people are reacting to your story and giving you that feedback that lets you know, like, you made a good thing with this, you know, bad thing that happened to you. Yeah.
I mean, and that's the whole point of it, isn't it? Right. And, you know, like, this bad thing happened, and sure, it's not like the worst thing that could happen in the world. There are worse things. But again, in the same way of like, let's not be in competition with one another as women. Like, I also try to stay away from this pain competition, you know, like the scorecard of pain. And yes, this is one pain, and it's nothing compared to, there are, you know, in the hierarchy of bad things that could happen to a person in this world. This is a low one, but it's still a one. It is still a pain, and it hit me in a very particular way. And I mean, the greater purpose of it is not to, like, look at that pain as something that I have to just, like, I had to just get over by myself, you know, and figure out how to pretend it wasn't happening. The point of this was to talk about the emotional toll and the emotional journey, for lack of a better word, that I went on, and my own bad behaviors as a result, and my own figuring stuff out. Because that's what people connect to so deeply about the story, I think, or about the writing maybe, is that, like, even if they haven't gone through the specific thing that I went through, that doesn't matter. Like, that's a secondary plot point almost. Like, it's like the main character of this story is grief, right? And loneliness, and trying to figure out how to crawl out of the pit of grief and loneliness and isolation. Yeah. But with, like, this undercurrent of hope all the time. I don't know what I was saying. I forgot the original question. But these are all the themes, you know what I mean? These are the things. Yeah.
Well, no, I was just thinking too, like it's, in a way, it's such perfect timing for the book to come out, because although it's not about a relationship and heartbreak, I think everybody collectively in the world has gone through this period of isolation. And for a lot of people, that's been very difficult. It's been very lonely. It's been, there has been grief in terms of, you know, loss of events and moments and experiences. And there's a lot of stuff to process and deal with. And so people can read the book and almost go through that journey with you. Relate.
I think it's not like, sometimes I feel like it's maybe I don't want to be crass or gauche or whatever to say like, this is actually a perfect time for this book that's called Alone to come out. But like the themes in the book are touch on so much of what people are experiencing right now, like you said, right? I mean, it's life. It's about life changing overnight. It's about living with uncertainty. It's about feeling isolated and loneliness, grief, all those things. And the thing that a lot of people are feeling that they haven't been able to name, right? Like in these 2 months of being home all the time, there's like this. People are feeling like, I just feel depressed, or like they don't have a word for it. But I really do think that the word is grief. So you have this grief, like you said, over what you've lost, like maybe events that were going to happen, or maybe you're grieving the life we had before when we could just walk around like normal or whatever. And then you also have this anticipatory grief, right? So we have this grief of like not knowing what's coming next. And those two exact things are the things that I was feeling, and the things that I'm talking about in this book is like grief of a life changed overnight and what once was, and then an anticipatory grief of like never knowing what the next day is going to bring or what's going to happen. So yeah, like it's been kind of weird to release this book right now, but in a way I am glad that it wasn't postponed, because
we need it now more than ever.
It would have been nice to have a launch party and to like go to all the writers' festivals that I was invited to, because this is my first book and I've never gotten to do that before. But at the same time, I feel like kind of blessed that it's out in the world at a time when so many people are experiencing the kind of things I'm talking about in the book.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the book is Alone, a Love Story. Also, same name for the podcast. So if you haven't heard that either, you can obviously check out the podcast as well. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's always it's a great conversation, and yeah, we just appreciate your sharing of your story, and of course, people, you can get it off the Dundurn website. You can get it anywhere books are sold, and same with the podcast Alone, a Love Story. Michelle Parise, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks so much. Have a great day.
You too. We will be right back on The Breakdown, Channel 167, Canada Talks.